We are live and direct, Professor, and welcome to an NFT Meta podcast. I'm Alan Chang, the founder of NFTmeta.com. With us today is a very well-known scholar, Professor James Cooper, and he's a legal reformer and legal scholar of many years' experience. He's also the professor of law and director of international studies at California Western University in San Diego, California. Professor, thank you for joining our podcast today. We have many things to talk about, and so let's go straight into it. The first thing is you're a well-regarded professor, legal scholar, many years experience. Can you tell us how you came to follow cryptocurrencies, blockchain, NFTs from a legal perspective?
Well, firstly, thanks so much for having me, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here. And hi, everybody. I have been doing for over 25 years something called legal reform, and I worked primarily in Latin America. And what my task was, and it was funded by a number of governments and ministries of justice and foundations and the Organization of American States and the Inter-American Development Bank, and we pretty much take money from anybody. Latin America, as it moved out of its military period in the late 80s and early 90s, moved its legal system, its criminal law, procedural law, from the inquisitorial system to the adversarial system. So that's saying, updating by several hundreds of years away from the Spanish Inquisition, not exactly the highlight or emblem of modernization or modernity or enlightenment, to a system closer to a more, I don't want to use the word Western, I'd say or Northern industrialized, but certainly an adversarial system that allowed for cross-examination, due process rights, the right to hear to confront your accuser, the right to hear the evidence, the right to a public defender, a broad panoply of civil rights that are included in the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, that are part of the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948, that are part of the International Bill of Rights. And as Latin America moved towards away from the inquisitorial system towards the adversarial system, they required change agents. And I did that for more than 2 decades. That is training lawyers, judges, judicial administrators, politicians, lawmakers in why it was important to have transparency, participation, and efficiency in their legal system. Now, out of that first generation, and now I know it's a super long answer, but I'm a law professor, so I get paid by the word. For the record, there's no money being transacted here. That was a joke. But part of these first generation rights also allows for economic reforms to take place, for privatization, for a number of what are called Washington Consensus, IMF, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, Department of Treasury of the US, a series of policy prescriptions that included things like criminal law reform, but not always. And so as Latin America opened up its economy and to neoliberal reforms, I was a change agent for 15 different countries for a long period of time, and spent a lot of time in Latin America, worked in everywhere from Mexico to Chile and in between, and then started doing work in Asia. But as I was doing work in Latin America, once we were able to get a few success stories, and that's the key story here, is a few, because it didn't work. Often we just build courtrooms and they'd wave a magic wand and say, you're hereby adversarial, without training anybody. But on the rare occasion we got a victory, we also started to see second generation rights, like intellectual property rights, like indigenous rights, like DNA, and I didn't realize that was disruption. I realize now it's disruption because you're completely changing hundreds of years of a legal system and a legal culture and moving it to something completely different and more modern in a very leapfrog technology. When we used a lot of case management software and a variety of other kinds of technologies, oral advocacy skills, even mediation, ballistics, DNA, to do some of the early first generation reforms. The second generation reforms required a lot of listening and a lot of proactive community building. And what I started to realize, and I started doing work in Taiwan, the People's Republic, and I got a chance to meet a lot of wonderful reformers, worked with Jason Xu, the ex-congressman from the KMT in Taiwan, who's also a member of the Impact NFT Alliance. and I got to work with Dr. Michael Sung, who's at Fudan University, one of the co-founders and co-directors of the Fanhai FinTech Research Center in Shanghai at Fudan University. So I got to see, not only in a cross straits kind of way, but in a Pacific Century kind of way, what we were missing in Latin America, but the importance of other leapfrog technologies. So I started as a comparative lawyer and as a legal reformer, started doing work in the tech sector to find out ways to make Latin America's and also the rest of the world's economies more integrated, more efficient, and to get rid of the very slow legal systems that get in the way of transactions. And that's what attracted me to blockchain. So fast forward to 2018, January, on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Michael Sung and I were the co-hosts and co-conveners of the One World Blockchain Alliance at the Hard Rock Hotel for 3 days. And some young Chinese entrepreneurs came up to me and said, we really like what you were talking about in your panel. Would you be open to being an advisor for our blockchain company? So that's what was my gateway into blockchain. And it's been a wicked ride ever since. It's been just an e-ticket ride, we say about, Disney World. And it's the best MBA and I never got. And better than that, it's amazing to have mentors who are half your age. So that was the very long-winded way of saying I got here in a very heuristic, meandering kind of way. PS now I write for CoinDesk and Coin and Yahoo Finance and Cointelegraph and The Hill and a bunch of other platforms about disruptive technologies, increasingly about artificial intelligence. But I think blockchains are super important technology that we need to liberate from the scammers and the pump and dumpster and the fraudsters and no good nicks out there and make it what it's really meant to be. So I'm excited by that. And then NFTs as well. I think that we've barely scratched the surface of what NFTs can do.
Excellent, Professor. So you know a lot about Asia as well. And of course, you know that some countries like China have outright banned non-state issued digital currencies, but are allowing very sophisticated central bank issued digital currencies. Do you see countries of the West ever outright banning private sector issues and launching government-led digital currencies?
I think that's going to be a more difficult row to hoe. It's going to be, it's easier in command economies. It's easier in more market authoritarian contexts. In a free market, it's a very difficult thing to do to outlaw these sorts of technologies, because you also freeze yourself out of new forms of capital formation. There's a need in the West to constantly be innovating, like there is in the People's Republic or all sorts of other places. And that the West now is, and Northern industrialized countries are so much invested in, particularly their capital markets. When you see the big sharks like Goldman Sachs or any of the other VC funds out there that are now getting involved, or banks or near banks or merchant banks, everybody and their uncle is somehow, even in the midst of this crypto winter, somehow getting involved. It's too late to kind of to pull back. I think there's going to be there's a fear that if the West doesn't continue to innovate in a private chain kind of way, it's going to fall prey to the larger centralized, decentralized systems like the DCEP in China, the digital currency electronic payment initiative, when coupled with Made in China 2025 with the Belt and Road Initiative, is really propelling China to be the hegemon in blockchain. So the short answer is I don't see the West and Western countries outright banning it like they did in the People's Republic. And remember, they banned it in the People's Republic years ago, and they kept saying, no, we're serious about it. No, stop doing that. And then there wasn't a lot of enforcement. And then finally last year, all the ASICs machines had to leave. But it wasn't until last year when they kept in their various, sometimes it was the People's Bank, sometimes it was different economics ministries that would, or sometimes more localized government officials would say, no, you're not allowed to do Bitcoin mining, no electronic, no mining here, no, and people kept doing it. But now they've gotten very hardcore about it, and clearly it's not happening. That's harder to do, more difficult to do in countries where there's too many freedoms, and where capitalism is king, if
Absolutely.
you will.
Absolutely understood. Now, that said, global regulators and lawmakers in the West are increasingly regulating and legislating cryptocurrencies and NFTs. Can you tell us where we are in terms of the legal world coming to regulate, to work with government to regulate? Where are we in the state of regulation in the
That's a
West?
great question, Alan, because in the last 2 years, we've seen a change among the various international institutions, whether it's the OECD, the Bank of International Settlements, the latter of which is the central bank for central banks, some of the other international organizations that are out there, the Bretton Woods institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, formerly known as the Bank of Reconstruction and Development after World War II. They've all been searching for like, what next? What's their next role? Because allegedly a liberal democracy and capitalism won, which we all know is not true after 1989. That end of history idea of Francis Fukuyama didn't count on Venezuela, Cuba, Vietnam, the People's Republic, and a number of other countries that continued to practice command economies and non-market economies in a pure sense. So we're now at a stage where, because the international agencies out there, these traditional financial institutions, are now saying, well, initially we weren't so hot on central bank digital currencies, and we're not so hot on these, the threat to fiat currencies, because that's a total paradigm shift, and it would change not just their ability to centralize finance, and control fraud and ensure depositor investments are protected, and mom and pop investors are protected, but also depositors' money's protected that are involved in DeFi and so forth. They kind of changed their tune over the last 2 years and gone from, well, we're studying it, to now we're deploying, but in a more, we're still going to study it. So there's still a lot of navel gazing. There are a few outliers out there. They're the Marshall Islands and the SOV. Venezuela and the Petro, which is always interesting to me to see how Venezuela did it, because it's clearly a play to evade U.S. sanctions and other international sanctions. The Petro did it. They anchored, or they collateralized the Petro, their version of a centralized central bank digital currency, with future reserves. The only problem is it's like a second mortgage, and they'd already given China and Russia other collateralization on the same reserves. So it's not a very secure structure for the Petro if you look at the dynamics behind it. The U.S. has looked at it. They, in fact, a lot of people don't realize, in March of 2020 with COVID, the initial PPP, the Paycheck Protection Plan, I think it was called, program, initially had a digital wallet attached to it for the 17 million households in the United States that are unbanked. 17 million households still in the US are unbanked. And so they were going to give stimulus packages. Initially, some of the first bills that came out of the House version of the PPP had a digital currency piece to it. It got taken away. The banks and their lobbyists and the traditional legacy banks made sure of that. But it could have happened in the U.S. too. Now there is, Chris Giancarlo's digital dollar project. You can check that out at digitaldollarproject.org. There are a number of other studies that are going on, but the U.S. has not, in a centralized way, said we're going to do this and we're going to do it big. And they should be thinking about this, because if other countries do it, and they're able to get rid of the need to use SWIFT and a bunch of other legacy mechanisms, then the U.S. runs the risk of no longer being the sole global currency, reserve currency. And that's dangerous from a geopolitical point of view for the U.S. And its allies. China, the People's Republic of China, on the other hand, with its DCEP, the day after Mark Zuckerberg, first David Marcus from Facebook, now Meta, and then Mark Zuckerberg in July of 2019, I believe it was, went to a Congress or a committee and started talking about, at the time it was called Libra, now it's called Diem. They started pitching their idea, and Mark Zuckerberg said, I'm paraphrasing, if you don't let us do this, Congress, the Chinese are going to eat our lunch. Which was and suddenly the Chinese officials said, oh God, they know what's going on, because they've been studying this from 2014. how to do this. So they went into high gear, and then by October they had National Blockchain Day in China, and then they started doing a couple of cities tests, and then they rolled it out fully with the recent Olympics. And what you're seeing now is by connecting it to the Belt and Road Initiative with more than 70 countries as part of the international treaty system or agreement system that the PRC's promulgating around and promoting around the world, cheap loans, collateralized, but you got to use our 5G and our blockchain, our cryptocurrency, our decentralized crypto nationalist project. You have to, then now we're seeing the Chinese making a much bigger play, and it's part of their overall strategy. Naturally, this is all common knowledge as part of the 2020 Made in China 2025 initiative, which is the Chinese want to be first movers and dominant in all the future industries, whether it's AI, 5G, robotics, conductor chips, blockchain, smart cities, autonomous vehicles, all the intellectual property, going back to my previous work. And I served on a U.S. delegation to the World Intellectual Property Organization advisory committee on enforcement many years ago. So I'm an IP scholar. So I was very interested in how now China's actually filing since 2012, filing more patents than the EU, the US, South Korea, the Republic of Korea, and Japan combined. Now, a lot of those are junk patents. 90% of them or so are vacated after the first year. But the point is they're playing the patent game. And SIPO, the State Intellectual Property Organization of the People's Republic of China, is super busy with all these patents. And they're filing the patents and they're using the patent cooperation treaty to a limited degree, but they're getting out there. So, the crawler underneath is China is no longer the pirate nation, no longer the copycat nation. China is the innovator now. And I can foresee a time when the West will be copying and pirating what the Chinese are doing if we don't get our act together and be less concerned about likes and being hot, which you can't export, and more concerned about STEM, science and technology and engineering and math and math and more math, as uncool as that may be. If you look at the Shanghai study, and the US and Western countries continue to fall behind in terms of our scores, it's time to step up our game. And more importantly, find ways and better ways to collaborate with the People's Republic and the entrepreneurs and the massive capital machine that they have there, whether through state-owned enterprises or not. There has to be ways that we can share these things, because when we're talking with each other and when we're working together, we're less likely to be at odds. And I think that's, yes, you have to be concerned about national security and national industrial policy, of course, absolutely, and export controls. Yes, that's a given. But given the number of Chinese scientists that are doing work here and helping U.S. companies file patents, it's something to be concerned about. So this again, a very long-winded answer to what is happening with central banks. The short answer is the U.S. and the other Western countries are studying. Sweden's made some steps. There are a number of other countries, the ECB with Christine Lagarde. Everyone's looking at it, but I'll tell you what's really going to hurt this crypto winter right now is now putting the halt on that, because they're not seeing the private chains doing as well, and the price of crypto has fallen so precipitously that I think it's a huge opportunity for central bank digital currencies right now. So in all of this negativity, we have to find ways to continue for true believers to make the internet and Web 3.0 and all that other stuff become a reality in a safe, measured, and controlled way.
Excellent. So the next question is, and perhaps you've already touched upon this, but basically, what are the key legal and regulatory trends going forward guiding the developments in NFTs and all blockchain-based financial instruments? That's
the $1 million question, or the 7 million yuan question. Excuse me. The short answer is regulators, and the Chinese don't have to worry about this because they've outlawed all the private chains, but the regulators here and elsewhere have to figure out, is crypto a security? Okay. And when I say crypto, put in NFT. Or is it a commodity? Or is it a currency? Or is it a utility like everybody and who's pushing it say, oh no, it's a utility? Because they don't want to get the Wild West environment helps fraudsters and other no good nicks. So what's going on now, Alan, is that there's a push in the US, for example, and elsewhere to sort of get some rules together that will make sense, but not chill capital formation. And that's a difficult dance. So you see Gary Gensler, who's the chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission, saying, look, we're going to have to regulate this. This is a security and we need to do what it takes to protect investors without putting too much of a problem on capital formation. The other piece of the puzzle, is it a commodity? Is it like pork bellies, orange juice futures? Should it be treated by the Commodities Future Trading Commission, the CFTC, or should it be regulated by Department of Treasury and the Office of the Currency Controller, because it's a currency? And so that discussion needs to be a little more public and much more robust right now, because that's where the head of Brian from Coinbase said, oh, it's got to be a brand new institution, and here's how you regulate. That's like regulatory capture alert. When the exchanges are telling us how to regulate us, how we should regulate them, that's called regulatory capture. That's dangerous for democracy and dangerous for consumer protection. So we're still in that struggle, Alan. And I think the more we can educate the public on this, the more we can educate our legislators on this. And I think that's a great role that Impact NFT Alliance, the folks at NFT Meta, all of us together through our media partners need to educate the regulators and consistently do it.
Very good. Professor, let's look into, this is our last question. Please look into your future scope. 20 years from now, in the 2040s, what do you foresee in terms of digital currencies in the West, and how sophisticated a market might they become, and how might they be used and regulated?
That's I think there's a great future for this. This is the internet without intermediaries. I know anybody who's watching this is already a true believer. So I don't have to convince you, but it's convincing everybody else. What I need to convince all the true believers is this is not just about making money. This is not about obfuscating your ill-gotten gains. It shouldn't be about mobster money being hidden and and then the forensic people from various law enforcement agencies have to come in with their anti-money laundering initiatives, and we force everyone with know your customer, which is banks do it. If you want to be a big boy, so you need to wear your big boy pants. So you can't be $1 trillion, once a $3 trillion, maybe a $2 trillion, depending on whose numbers you believe, industry without expecting to be regulated. One. So I see some regulation coming down the pike. I also see a chance for NFTs to be used more for things more than a Bored Ape Yacht Club or silly ways for a few folks, or the GOATs, the greatest of all times, the Tom Brady's and the other collectibles. That's a great use of it, but it shouldn't be the only use of it. Just like blockchain can be used for so many more things, like food security, like land titling. Well, NFTs likewise can be used for that as well. A former student of mine, Peter Grazel from ETH Law, now practicing law here in California, and I wrote a piece in CoinDesk at the end of last year about NFTs being used to promote the right of self-determination and other important human rights. So you can see a future, and I can see a future where self-determination, which was Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, was one of the points there. It's in the Charter of the United Nations, where all people can freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. All peoples can. This is from the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant of Economic, Civil, and Cultural Rights. So you get both the capitalist world and the Soviet camp during the Cold War signing on to this Article 1, which was the same. NFTs can be used to protect that, whether it's voting rights and access to the electoral process can be facilitated by NFTs, making everything more accessible, strengthening the process. We don't have time today to go into that, but we have to find ways, and this again is an important mission of Impact NFT Alliance, to do what it takes to get NFTs for carbon capture, for carbon credits, to reduce the global climate change challenges that we're facing, and find ways where you can do good and do well all at the same time.
Very good. Thank you, Professor, for taking your time to look at the past, present, and future of blockchain and NFTs. I'm sure many of your predictions will come out to be true in the coming years. You're absolutely right. Regulations will be increasing in the West and for the better. And ultimately will be making NFTs much more secure and much less of a scam prone type of instruments. Thank you so much for your time today, Professor.